This is the Creek Midweek.
Come on now, people. Come on now, people. Gonna praise the Lord. Come on now, church. Come on now, church. Come on now, church. Gonna praise the Lord.
Well, welcome to the Creek Midweek. I'm your host, Austin Upchurch. I'm here with our pastor, Trevor Barton.
Hey there, Austin.
How you doing today?
I'm doing good. You?
I'm doing well. Doing well. So, here we are. We're launching this podcast. What folks probably don't know is that we were planning to launch a podcast anyway.
Yeah, we've been talking about this for months.
Right. Not only have we been talking about it,
Right.
we have actually done a couple.
We have.
Well, one, I suppose.
That will never be heard.
It's been heard by a few.
By only a special few.
That's right. And they are special indeed. So we've been practicing up. We've been getting ready for this, maybe for such a time as this.
I think so. I think this is a great time for us to give another avenue to be present in the life of people that are part of our faith community and other communities that may want to join in on the conversation that we're going to be having today and the conversations we'll be having in the future.
Yeah, for sure.
It'll be good.
So our thought behind doing a podcast in general was the fact that we sit around the office lots of times and we have great conversations, sometimes heated conversations at times, but really good conversations that we get to the end of those conversations and say, man, I wish we had that recorded. I wish other folks could have heard this. It would have been very beneficial. So we started talking about the possibility of capturing these conversations and getting these out to folks. And of course, we also had people who were saying, man, Sunday's awesome, but I wish there was something else that we could get. And so we created this idea of the Creek Midweek. So it's your opportunity to jump in midweek, and on Wednesdays we will plan on releasing this thing, and if all goes well, that's what will happen. So what we're going to do generally is we're going to talk about the message from last Sunday. We will begin taking questions from folks who have been at the sermon, who have questions they want to get answered, and we'll talk about some of those. We have some of those for today, so that's coming up. And we'll talk about the message, but also dig a little bit deeper into the content, because we don't always have time on Sundays to do that. Like I said, we'll discuss the submitted questions and then kind of get down to the practical implications of that message. And so that's what we're going to do today. Obviously, this is a little bit of a different time. We've taken a break from our current series due to the circumstances going on in the world with COVID-19. And so today we're going to talk about your message, What Now, which was sort of your address to our church Sunday, that in the midst of what's going on, okay, what do we do? How do we respond to this? So we'll dig a little deeper into that, ask a few questions, and then talk a little bit about what this means and how we follow Jesus during this time specifically. So with all that said, Pastor, we'll jump right into this. I know that news has been breaking, and it seems like things are changing hourly. But over the course of the last couple of weeks, we've been all sort of receiving information differently at different times, and certainly digesting information at different paces as information has come available. And so if you don't mind, why don't you walk us through sort of how this has unfolded for you, and when you realized that COVID-19 was a legitimate crisis, as you said Sunday, and a legitimate threat.
Well, I guess I'm kind of embarrassed on one hand to say initially I was a bit snarky about it. I just thought, what is all of this stuff that people are talking about? Why is this a big deal? And my sentiments were really birthed out of ignorance. And so even at the office last week, midweek, I just couldn't believe that everybody was talking about this, and so I just kind of put it back on the back burner and said, well, this is silly, and so the next morning, I'm getting dressed for the office, and Allison says, hey, what's your plan for this weekend? So our plan for this weekend is to have church. What's your plan for this weekend? And she said, have you done very much reading on the whole thing? And I said, well, to be honest, no, not entirely. So she gave me a briefing about it and said, here's some things to keep in mind. Here's some things that are being said. And so we talked, and after listening to her point of view, then I just started reading about what was actually happening and why it was happening and what the fear that could happen actually was, and why the things that people were talking about social distancing and canceling events, and why those things were important and wise and responsible. And so I evolved into the perspective of, okay, the most responsible, wise, loving thing that we can do as a church is to postpone our weekend services, which is what we did, and then to have services online, which is what we did. So for me at the beginning, I was in an entirely different mode of thinking about this. And then through reading and education and listening to really smart people who are studying this thing, and that's their job and that's their responsibility, leaning on their understanding and their insight really gave me the perspective of, wow, okay, this is a big deal. And this is a big deal right now. It could be a worse deal in the future, and this affects all of us. This is a worldwide thing. We're all on the same ship together, and we've all got a responsibility to play. So that was the beginning of everything for me. Obviously, everything started happening then, cancellation, NCAA, NBA, SEC, and you could just feel the palpable panic, it seemed like, on social media, among friends, in the community, culture, and all of a sudden, it was like this thing went from, whatever, to, oh my gosh, we've never been here before. We've never faced anything like this before in our generation, and all of a sudden it got entirely real fast. And since then, of course, it's become an even larger deal, more information, and very real people are being affected now in very real ways. It's affecting people's jobs. It's affecting small businesses. It's affecting local churches all across America. There's very few people that are living their lives that are not affected. And truth be told, everyone should be feeling this, if not in direct implications, in the sense that we're all trying to be mindful of what we're being asked to do. And so our lives are being upset from the normal status quo. So we should all be feeling it in that respect. So, I mean, it's been a deal over the last few days. Saturday morning, my family went out to go get groceries just because we've been away for a few days. And that was really my first experience of walking into a supermarket, and there weren't a lot of options.
Right.
And so that was kind of sobering and surreal. So I think that over the last few days, this thing has been so fluid. It's changed so much. So that's a little bit of my story from it, from Wednesday, Tuesday of last week until, this is Tuesday when we're recording this. It's just been, it's been enormous in the sense of how much has changed since then versus now.
Yeah,
So.
and some folks may not know, but you're sort of in a unique situation. You mentioned Allison, your wife, that she is a medical doctor, and so I'm sure you're receiving a lot of info from her as well.
Well, I mean, if folks, they can, facts are our friends, and Google, puts a world of information at our fingertips. It also puts a world of misinformation at our fingertips. So we have to make sure that our sourcing is credible and legitimate. But when you read what very sensible people are saying, for us as a family, it really is a serious thing, because obviously Allison's on the front line, as are all medical providers and doctors, nurses, assistants, everybody in the healthcare profession. They're on the front lines of this thing, and they're all preparing for some level of what seems to be inevitable, and so that's a big deal for us as a family, and of course for other people who have loved ones and friends that are serving our communities in local hospitals and clinics and first responders. there's real considerations for real people that have very high stakes all around us. So this is just not a benign thing that the world's talking about. This is something real serious, even if it doesn't seem to be knocking at your door today. It's a very serious thing, because there's somebody's door that it may knock at, and that for some people, in our country and communities, that's the first door that something like this knocks on. People with pre-existing illnesses, people who skew higher in age, and so, a big deal for sure.
So you kind of realized that this thing was getting serious towards the end of last week. We moved all of our services online, and then we walked into Sunday. And I remember you mentioning during the sermon that there was a point before the service where you were kind of standing around looking at the empty room, got a little emotional. And so what was your mindset? What was going on in your heart and in your mind going into Sunday?
Well, I hated like everything canceling the weekend. I mean, I did. I know you did. It went, man, it was just tough. And I was making a lot of phone calls and trying to get a lot of counsel and talking to our leaders here and leaders outside of our church, and trying to get the best information. I don't think I'd ever felt anything as weighty. I never had felt such a tangible sense of responsibility as it relates to other people than in that period of time. And so I really had to, get to the bottom of, okay, I don't want this decision to be fear-based. I don't want this decision to be selfish. I don't want this to be, about anything that it shouldn't be. And I remember, I even walked into your office, and you and Zach were there, and maybe Jared, and I was, just came in and said, no, we're going to cancel. And I was on the verge of just tears then, and I really didn't even know why. And then Sunday morning I walk in, and it was all just so bizarre. And I thought to myself, this is a new day. This is a new normal, and we're not really sure how long this extends out. There was and is, to some degree, a level of uncertainty, and because of that, so I was just watching, the band rehearse and the skeletal crew of volunteers that we had here get ready for everything, and I just thought to myself, this is sad. But on one hand, this is exciting because we still get to talk to our church and address our church. But moving into Sunday, I just wanted to help people try to process it, and to think about, okay, this is where we are, and we really can't change anything leading up to that. But what we can think about is, okay, this is where we are, and what now? Because I think that's the question that crisis asks of all of us. What are you going to do now? And it's not necessarily about tomorrow, but it's about in this moment, what can I do right now that will make the biggest difference in the moments to come? So that's really what I wanted to help our church do, was to think about this through a lens of the Scripture, and through someone like the Apostle Paul, who'd been in a difficult situation, to say, okay, this is something very practical that we can do in this moment to help us move forward in the face of crisis, so that as the church we're ready. We're ready to face this, and we're ready to make a difference in the lives of people as they face it.
Yeah. As I said, I know that was a very difficult decision. We don't want to cancel our church services. We never want to do that. We don't want to have to get out of the norm. But I think one of the greatest things about what has occurred over the past couple of days or week is that once you made that decision, you led us in such a way that you said, all right, the decision's made. Now, what does this mean for us, and how can we best serve our people in this specific time? And so I know we've mentioned almost every opportunity we've had how hard our staff has worked, and I think that applies. It's always a good thing to say thank you and to acknowledge them, because they really have done an incredible job, and all this week have been working hard to even bring these new forms of connection to our church. But it was just such a great, I thought, moment in time where you could have sort of wallowed in the sadness of, we have to cancel the services, but to look at everybody and say, hey, we're gonna innovate. We're gonna move forward. We're gonna get outside the box. We're gonna figure out what this means and what God's asking us to do in this time. I thought was a great way to lead us through this with optimism. And
what's one of the great things about being alive in the generation where we're in? We have the opportunity to still communicate and to be present, and without assembling together within a physical location. And so, we'd already been doing church online before, but obviously as we approached it last weekend, there was nothing in addition to church online. This was it. This was our primary way to communicate to the people who call the Creek Church their church, and to figure out how can we do this the best that we can in a short amount of time. How can we take what we're already doing and raise the volume on it? How can we make it where people can actually engage with us and we engage with them? And so I think we had a tremendous first Sunday. Over 4,000 people viewed. We average about 2,200 people on a given Sunday, and so double that. They were watching, and we learned a lot, and we think that, hey, this weekend's going to be even better as it relates to our online experience. And I'm hopeful that as families gather and as friends under the number of 10 gather together, perhaps that it is a fresh way to experience the local church in a season where it has to be this way.
Yeah. And so for folks who maybe don't know, that's the current recommendation by the CDC, correct? That
right.
Groups only 10 or less get together at this time. And as we've said many times, things are changing rapidly. We're all sort of trying to figure out, okay, what is reality in this moment? And I think to a certain degree, you mentioned earlier, reputable sources of information, making sure that you're using a reputable source. And there's so much being said on news outlets and different things. And so I think in general, we're all sort of struggling to figure out, okay, what is the reality of this situation? And actually there was a story, there's a family in our church, and I saw a post from the mother this morning, and I wanted to share that really quickly because their son has a congenital heart defect called transposition of the great arteries, which essentially his main arteries are transposed. They're in opposite spots. And so their son is at very high risk right now if he were to be infected with the virus. And so she posted this morning a picture holding her son, and the caption said, this is something that folks are thinking, and maybe some of you even said out loud, that only the vulnerable are at risk. And she put at the bottom, but your only is my everything. And so how significant, as we try to figure out reality, how significant is this really? And if I'm personally not at significant risk, should I be concerned at all?
Well, I think that people are right to be thinking about who's at risk. And though everybody may not have equal risk, everybody does have equal responsibility. And for those who don't sense any risk, I think they should have an even greater sense of responsibility. And it just doesn't even pertain to things like this, though it does. There are people who are at higher risk, and there are people who seem to be at lower risk. But if I find myself in the lower risk category, it really is irrelevant to my responsibility. If love protects the most vulnerable among us, if what we do for the least of these or the most vulnerable of these or the highest risk among us, if that's what we do for them, Jesus says, hey, you're doing it as unto me. And I think that that's really, the narrative that should be out there in addition to risk. It's also this idea of responsibility because, from the very beginning when we made our announcement, we said we believe that canceling our services is the wisest, most responsible, and most loving thing to do. Yeah. And the wise course and the responsible course and the loving course really is going over and above. I mean, when you think about John 15, greater love has no man than this, than one who would lay down his life for his friends. Well, if Jesus was talking about our life, surely to goodness it also involves our routine. Surely it involves our social calendar. Surely it involves doing things a bit different than how we're used to doing them, if it means that somebody else is going to be, the beneficiary of it. So I do think that for the local church and for church leaders, this is an incredible opportunity to practice Philippians 2, that Jesus, that he laid down his rights of deity to some respect, though he was fully God and fully man, but he laid aside his ability to always throw the God card, and he, submitted himself, and he served others, and he did it to such the degree that it cost him his life. And so I think that it's a great opportunity for us to show people what tangible love looks like. And if I have to change my routine, and if I have to change, what I like to do and how I like to do it, but it's for the benefit of others, I can't think of anything else that says I love you than, hey, I'm willing to lay down my preferences and what I do for you. And so I think that this is a great opportunity for the church to say this is at the heart of our faith.
Yeah.
Love is not a part of our faith; it's the point of our faith. This is at the heart of the gospel. Our Savior laid down his life for the benefit of others, and we were the others. And so I think this is a great opportunity to shout from the rooftops our greatest talking point, which is love. This is a great opportunity for us to say, okay, this is what the church was known for in the first centuries, when we turned the world upside down and when an entire empire was toppled. I think this is a great opportunity to come back and say that this may be a horrible moment for the world, but on another plane, from another perspective, this is a great opportunity for the church to re-embrace the heart of our faith, which is, I prefer you over me, and I'm going to lay down my life so that you can live yours. So I think this is a great opportunity for the church to make love its talking point.
So Sunday, you kind of started the message off with the idea that we are in a moment of crisis, that if the world feels like it's in crisis, it's because it is. And you spoke to us the words from Paul, from Peter, from James, and Jesus, who all spoke of times like this, times of crisis. And one of the first points you made was that gratitude is the first step to joy. And so what do you think the church at large right now should be looking at to say, hey, we're grateful for this?
Well, I think, first of all, choosing gratitude requires us to take a very intentional perspective. We have to go look, investigate, consider, think about our lives, about what's present in our lives, about what's absent in our lives, to really obtain this perspective of gratitude. So, gratitude puts us in a posture of reflection. It puts us in a posture of, I'm going to step back. I'm going to look at my life. I'm going to look at the world around me, and I'm going to find the good. I'm going to go look for the good, because sometimes we don't see the good unless we go look for it. But I'm going to go look for the good, and I think that for the church at large, like I said a moment ago, I think we can be very grateful that we have the technological abilities and capabilities to maintain communication with people. Those technologies may exist at different levels among churches, but whether it's FaceTime, text messaging, Facebook Live, Instagram TV, we all have some level of capacity to maintain social connections, though we're not having social proximity. And that's a great thing for the church. The church started off gathering in the temple and gathering in homes. And there was a large group, and then there were small groups. And now our large group has become a digital context for this season that we're in. But families are able to keep contact with each other, friends, small groups, and even church leaders with their congregations through different avenues. So I think we have that to be grateful for. I think we've got a lot to be grateful for in our country as far as medical infrastructure and the things that we do have in place, folks who are working around the clock to try to figure this out. And so I think when we look around us, we do have lots of things to be grateful for. I think we should be grateful for that even in this difficult season, that there are going to be opportunities for us to step up to the plate. And, that in the midst of crisis, there's a great opportunity for compassion. And inevitably, there's going to be things that we can do and should do to try to be the hands and the feet and to, be a billboard for the compassion and the grace of God in people's lives. And I think we can be grateful for that. So I think, if we just pause and stop for a minute and think about the things that we have to be thankful for, I think that we may be surprised at how long that list actually becomes.
For sure. You mentioned some of those opportunities at the end there that we have as a church. And when I was thinking about the opportunity that we have before us, for some reason it reminded me of a series we did once upon a time called Don't Go to Church, which was slightly controversial title for the series.
I still have my T-shirt.
Yeah, I used to wear it.
You get more than a second look.
Yeah,
typically.
Yeah, I got asked about it a few times, and then when you turned around and showed them the back, which said "Be the Church," it usually calmed things down. As a matter of fact, when we spoke to the billboard provider that we were going to lease a billboard from, I sent him the artwork. He called me back and said, what is this? So I had to explain it to him. Once I explained it to him, he was all on board. But essentially that series was the idea was don't go to church, be the church. And so can you talk to us about the opportunity that we have as the church at large to do just that?
Well, and I think too, a good understanding of the church, we are all part of the church, and, Paul says that we're, some hands, some fingers, some elbows. And it is a beautiful thing when the church gets to gather together. That's a wonderful thing. But even when the church is scattered, we're all salt and light, and we're all part of the body of Christ, and we're all part of the church. And I think, on a very broad stroke, we can all demonstrate faith. We can all be a voice of hope, and we can all love. And faith, hope, and love to me really demonstrates what's at the heart of the local church. We're a people of faith, we're a people of hope, and we're a people of love. Matter of fact, we believe that the greatest expression of our faith is love, and we believe that faith is what gives birth to hope. And so all of those are, kind of meshed together to some shape, form, or fashion. But Paul was very clear, now abides faith, hope, and love, but the greatest of these is love. But I do think that from being a champion for our community, in the Old Testament, when the nation of Israel, when they were taken into captivity, Jeremiah told them to seek the prosperity of their city. And so I think that we should have that mindset that we want our local towns, our local city, our local businesses, our local companies and industry. We want to see them succeed, and we want to see them prosper, because the prosperity of businesses and business owners and of different things, those have very tangible, tentacles that really affect people's lives. So I think doing what we can to seek the prosperity of the city where we live, being a voice of, championing our city and encouraging the people that we're in community with. I feel like there's just many opportunities. We had the opportunity to partner with a local organization to help provide food and a specific protein for students who are going to be out of school during this time, and to just not make sure it's carbohydrates or sugar, but to give them something substantial. So we were able to partner, knowing that the schools were going to be out for the next couple of weeks at least. So I think there's lots of things that the corporate church can do, but on an individual level, calling people, checking on them. If you know someone who's elderly, afraid to get out, maybe offer to pick up their groceries, pick up their medication, see if they need anything. Make sure they have everything they think they need. And so I think that there's so many opportunities to serve. We just have to take a moment and think about it. So I think as we all live individually in our communities and on our streets, it's a good time to make sure we know our neighbor. It's a good time to make sure we know what's going on in the life of our neighbors, to think about those who are genuinely afraid, and to try to offer peace and hope and comfort. An opportunity, if we have people in our lives that are a bit more cynical and suspicious for whatever reason of all of this conversation about COVID-19, to compassionately educate and to be a champion for cooperation. I think that's probably, maybe the best way we can serve right now is just do what we're asked to do. If the government says don't get together in groups of 10 or more, hey, I can do that. Don't do this, don't do that, I can do that. So I think right now it's listening to the authorities that are over us, listening to the people who are experts in this, and just saying, hey, I'm a team player. I'm here, and whatever you need me to do, I'm here to do it. And that may be the most significant thing that we can do right now, is just do what we're asked to do by our government, local, state, and federal.
Yeah. So as you were talking just then, and you mentioned your neighbors, I think I got convicted a little bit, because I just realized I've been running pretty fast throughout this whole situation, and I haven't reached out to my neighbors. I know who they are, but I need to go. They're both over 60. I know one of them's in bad health. We have met, but I need to get home. I need to go see if I can help them. So,
sometimes I think we make it way too complicated. And sometimes I think many of us grew up in a church world where when we said, hey, what's the church going to do? What we really meant by that is, what is the organization that I'm a part of locally? What are they going to do?
Right.
Are they going to get involved? Are they going to send a team? Are they going to write a check? And there's that's legitimate. But also sometimes when I think about what's our church going to do, well, that kind of begins with me.
Right.
What am I going to do? What am I doing? What can I do? And so I think when we just stop and ask the question, what's the church going to do? Hold on, let me rephrase that. What am I as part of the church? What am I going to do? And I think that probably we would find that there are many opportunities, little things that are significant things.
Sure.
That we can do that's within our capacity, that would make a difference and an impact.
Yeah.
Maybe more than we give it credit for.
Yeah, there was a gentleman that attends our church that sent me a message yesterday and showed me that he had texted a local physician yesterday in Somerset, and basically just saying, hey, I know this is a tough time for you. I'm praying for you. I want you to know that if you need anything, that sort of thing. And the guy's response, the physician's response was, man, I really needed that encouragement at the end of this day. So just like you're saying, any little things like that, just the encouragement to folks who are on the front lines. And
I think we've got to be gentle with each other and compassionate and gracious. Everybody handles traumatic moments differently. And sometimes we don't even know that we're responding to emotional trauma or psychological trauma, this is kind of a traumatic moment. Yeah. It's concerning. And to say that this doesn't upset one's equilibrium, I just would doubt the honesty or the self-awareness of someone who might say that, because what we're hearing is unprecedented for our generation, and everybody's going to handle crisis differently. Some folks pull back, they become even more introverted. Some folks overcompensate, and some folks become just a little bit angry, a little bit short. And I think we have to be sensitive, and I think we have to be conscious of what's going on around us, because, we live in a world that sometimes people just don't feel comfortable with saying, I'm kind of struggling with this. I'm a little bit afraid. Yeah. And to know that everybody's dealing with this on some level. There's always the outliers who just they're just doing their thing, but
spaced out.
Yeah. But this morning I found myself, I got a little short with someone, and And I walked away, and before I got like 10 steps away, I thought to myself, okay, it's been one thing after the other this morning. We're trying to reevaluate everything as a church. We're trying to serve people better than we've served them before, and we're trying to make sure we're up for the challenge. But in the midst of trying to do all of that, the stress, the pressure, I immediately, tried to walk it back and say, hey, listen, I think my tone a minute ago was probably not very good. I'm sorry. Sometimes I don't roll with the punches, the best that I can. And the person, responded back immediately and just said, hey, we're all struggling through this. You, me, us, everybody. And I think that's just a good place to start, in our homes, among our friends, our community, people that, if you're still out there in retail and you're doing business with people, the tension's high, and we all have to be very generous with grace, as we should always, but perhaps a little bit more conscious to extend just a little bit more because of the extenuating circumstances, I think.
Yeah. So Sunday, we talked about, you mentioned the fact that during the plagues, the Christians were the ones who stepped into the situation. They didn't retreat. They walked into the mess, so to speak, and they, even to the point of, they were caring for people even to the point of death at times, and that is sort of our call as Christians. So we've got that idea floating out there, that Jesus has called us to love and be loving during this time, and to be there for people, and to count other people as more important than ourselves. And then we have this idea of, okay, we need to be wise as well. We need to use wisdom. And so what does it mean, or what does it look like to be wise during this time? Also to be loving during this time, and how do we manage the tension as followers of Jesus between those two?
Well, I think that context is everything. In the early centuries of the plagues in Rome, we're talking about pre-germ theory. We're talking about, pre-hospitals and clinics. We're talking about an antiquated period of history.
Sure.
And there was a real need. And Christians rushed into that vacuum and met the need. Obviously, I don't think that means that if you're not a medically trained individual that you should be rushing in to try to meet the need of someone who needs medical attention.
Sure.
Our context is obviously much different because we've evolved into a much more advanced society and culture. But I think at the heart of love is that if it's within my power to meet a need, then I'm going to try to meet that need. And someone's best need is probably not met by me practicing medicine. That's for the medical providers. But the idea was that in the absence of anybody else, the Christian stepped in. And I feel like that's the heart behind it, that when there's no one else and nothing else, we're willing to step into that zone. We're willing to step there, love, and be sacrificial. And I think in our world, it really is wisdom and responsibility of listening to what we're being told and loving through that mechanism. Mm-hmm. And in the culture that we're in and the society that we have, that is the equivalent of how we love in such a dramatic way. May it be said of us at the end of all of this, look at how those Christians stayed in. Look at how they listened to what they were asked to do. Wow. They were in the bars, they were in the restaurants, they were in this social setting and that social setting, but look at those Christians. They took it seriously. They did their part, and so hopefully, that will be our legacy through it, because I feel like our legacy has been love, and that was a wonderful time in history where the Christians were the only ones who were interested in the sick and the dying. And so they rushed there, and they cared for many of them. And, I could geek out on this for a while, but I won't. But, some folks have studied this, and there have been books written about this, that because Christians rushed to the side of those who were sick and dying, they actually were able to reach immunity much faster. So Christians, in many cases, had a higher survivability of those early plagues. But, that's neither here nor there, and I'm not making a case for the other. But I do think that at the heart of that early story, we just find out, what does love require of me? And in this moment, I think it's being responsible and wise. If I can keep myself out of large groups, if I can keep myself from, hopefully not unknowingly spreading something that I don't even know that I have, which we're told is a real possibility. I think right now that's the wisest, loving thing that we can do, and we can bring wisdom and love together and be both at the same time.
So one of the things that brings us the most comfort during this time is that, as you mentioned Sunday, that God is sovereign. And so for the follower of Jesus, that may be something that brings an incredible amount of comfort. But then for other folks, at the same time, that may be the thing that brings the greatest amount of confusion. And so how would you respond to someone who were to say, well, if God is sovereign and he allows this virus to continue, if he is as powerful as you Christians say that he is, and he could eradicate this, he could stop this, he could prevent people from dying. If he's sovereign and he allows this to continue, then how could he be good?
Well, I think first of all, it's good just to be very honest about a question that has perplexed and driven debate and motivated books and conversations for generation upon generation upon generation. Really, it's a great conversation. It's a great question. But I think it's really important to point out that if you're looking for an emotionally satisfying answer to this emotionally disturbing question, you're probably going to be disappointed at the other side. But at the same time, it's important to know that just because something isn't emotionally satisfying, it in no way undermines the validity or the truthfulness of it. There's a lot of emotionally disturbing things that are true. So I think, the great thing about the Christian worldview is that we do have a perspective on why there is pain and suffering in this world. And the scriptures address it in the very first book of the Old Testament, the book of Genesis. And then we see the effects of that event. We see an ongoing manifestation of what flowed out of the Garden of Eden. God obviously has given us the freedom of choice. And whenever there is choice, there is the choice for us to choose the loving thing or the non-loving thing. And the explanation that the Scripture gives us is that our first parents, they chose against God. They chose to distrust God. They chose to disobey. And that we find that as the genesis of everything that's wrong and evil and broken in our world, including decay, disease, and death. So, Christians, we have an explanation. It's not necessarily emotionally satisfying always, but it does give us a perspective of, in a world that's built on free choice, because God had to create a world of choice, because for there to be love, there has to be a choice to either choose love or choose against love. And in a world where you can choose for love, there is also the choice for evil. And when we see evil and disease and death in our world, for Christians, we understand that sin brought that into the world, and that we live in a broken world of viruses and mutations and unfortunate things that happen and tragic things that happen. But we also, as Christians, we look forward to the day where God has promised to take everything that is wrong with this world, and he's going to remake the world new heaven, new earth, and everything that's broken is going to be made whole, and everything that's wrong is going to be made right. And we call that the future kingdom of God and eternity. And, so I think that understanding that God is sovereign, he's in control, but also God has created a world where he's given you and I freedom to choose. And in a world where we're free to choose, sometimes we suffer the consequences for someone else's choices. We know that's true. It's unfortunate. It's emotionally disturbing, and we don't like it. I don't like it. But the Scripture does provide us an explanation for how is it that God is good and He is perfect, and yet there is a world full of sin, sorrow, and death. And the Scripture gives us a very cohesive explanation of that, which is one of the reasons why I think that the Scriptures are fascinating and really a book that is hard to ignore. Once you see the grander narrative of it, of what's wrong with the world, why is it wrong, and we see that playing out through the Old Testament, through some of the shady, crazy, wacky things that happen there, and we know why that is shady, wacky, and crazy, because of sin. And we see all the death and the war, and we have an explanation for that. Jesus shows up. He dies for sin. He's buried. He's raised from the dead. He promises that the kingdom of God is still yet to come. And so I do think that Christians have a cohesive understanding. For those who maybe be outside the faith, I understand that it may not be emotionally satisfying, but we do have a worldview in our faith that says, we understand that even beyond the pain, there's purpose, and every bad thing can be turned to good. So it is a legitimate struggle. It's a legitimate tension, and it's perplexed and bothered Christian and non-Christian alike for 2,000 years. And so, that's we could talk about that forever. But for me, I understand that God gave us choice, and once upon a time, our first parents chose wrongly, and in some degree, we have been suffering from the consequences of someone else's choices, and we suffer consequences of our own choices all the time.
Yeah.
And but to me, God is still good in a world that's broken, and He has promised to make it whole again.
Suffering the consequences of our choices is also not to say, of course, that everything bad that happens to us is a consequence of a choice that we or someone made. I think that goes without saying, but just to clarify for those. So do you think that on that same topic, as far as God being good, that our definition of good and God's definition of good are one and the same?
I doubt it. Oftentimes, I think that sometimes we have a hard time differentiating between a modern sense of good, an American sense of good. Good for who? Good often always means good for me.
Right.
And mostly for me.
Good for me now.
Yeah, good for me now. And we don't like to think about pain as being good. But pain can be good. I mean, if pain alerts you to a problem, and because of that alert, you're able to address the cause and the problem that is underlying. And even if it requires surgery and rehab and all of those things, if on the other side there is wholeness and healthiness, then that pain was a good thing.
Yes.
It was a good thing you felt that day, and it was a good thing that you paid attention to it and you got it checked out, and it was a good thing the doctor knew what to do about it. So we experience, good pain all the time, but sometimes there's a point where we just don't think of it in the same perspective, that even though we're going through a difficult time and a rough time, that there can be what God says good that comes out of it. And sometimes we're not even around to see that good. And sometimes we're not even paying attention when it's right there in front of our face. So I do think it's very difficult to keep our ideas of good and God's ideas of good running in the same direction, on the same tracks. But I do think that God does have our best interest at heart, while at the same time every other individual's best interest at heart. And sometimes our goods, what's good for me and good for you, it overlaps. Sometimes it doesn't. And but I do think that the more that we can keep our definition of good and God's definition of good on the same page, I think we would all be the better for it.
Definitely, for sure. Yeah, this is where I could geek out for just a minute, if you would allow, because I think that whole idea of what's best for me or what's good for me now, it gets into my whole love for and my theories about time.
Oh gosh, yeah.
Here we go.
I've heard this.
Yeah. So we're not going to take the time to get all the way into that. But I do think that obviously God does not experience time the same way that we do. If there is eternity, then in a space of eternity, then by definition there's no time, because it's forever. So I just think that we have to keep in mind that God experiences things different than we do. He knows more than we do. He is higher. He is above. And we are so concerned with the here and the now, the physical and the right now, that we don't even have the capacity to really understand what is good in the context of eternity and timelessness.
Well, I think we just have to fill in the gap with trust. I mean, even when we can't put a robust definition to good, what does that mean for me, for you, for us, for the world? In God's idea, in God's agenda and program and plan. I think it's Paul saying, these sufferings, I'm not a fan, didn't ask for it, but I'm just going to go ahead and trust that the sufferings of this present world are not going to be compared to the glory that's going to be revealed. Yeah. And I think that, he didn't know how it all worked out. Hey, I've got this thorn in the flesh. I've asked God 3 times to take it away, but I'm just going to trust in my weakness that his strength is made perfect and his grace is sufficient. Sometimes we just we want more details than we are allowed. And in the absence of details, it forces us to either trust or be suspicious or to just walk away. And I do think that knowing the heart of God and knowing that his heart is to do good, and for me, for you, for the world, then I do trust into his hands what's happening in the world, and that he does have a perspective that I can in no way have. I mean, who would want to serve a God whose perspective is similar to mine?
Right.
If God is not infinite in his understanding and perspective and knowledge, and how can I even begin to relate to what is infinite in my finite experience? And though it could be interesting to talk about, but at some point I just have to say what I can know about God and what I do know about God. He is good. He does good. And I'm going to trust him in those dark places to develop something that is so good and so beautiful and so wonderful that in God's time, in God's way, it will be known. And I'm just going to trust that and hold on to that, though I may in my lifetime never see that good. But one day we will know it for sure. So I do think it's some element of trust is required because of just what we can't know. If we could know everything, we wouldn't need trust, right? Faith.
That's right. So we trust that God is good, and that even in a time in our lives and in our generations where things are uncertain, things are changing, and we find ourselves in a new place quite physically for many of us who are having to stay home, and whatever level of that has affected you at this point, possibly that will be increased as we move forward in time, that maybe we will be stuck in our home even more so. But we want to encourage everybody to not waste that time, but to leverage it. We came across this story earlier, speaking of credible sources. This is from crediblesources.com. Just kidding. When we first mentioned this story, we were like, is that real? Is that true? So we went to the Washington Post and found this story that in 1665, Isaac Newton was just a college student at Cambridge, and they started practicing their version of social distancing because of the plagues. And so they sent everybody home. And so Isaac Newton was essentially quarantined to his home. And because of that, this is where he continued work on, I'm just going to read this now. He continued to work on his mathematical problems that he began at Cambridge, and the papers that he wrote during this time became early calculus. So calculus was introduced during this time.
Thanks, Isaac.
Yeah. AP calculus. And then next, he acquired a few prisms and experimented with them in his bedroom. He went so far as to bore a hole in his shutters so that only a small beam of light could come through. And from this sprung his theories on optics. And then, of course, the one we all have heard about, right outside his window, there was an apple tree. You know, that apple tree, that supposedly an apple fell on his head. Well, that story is embellished slightly, but he did observe an apple falling from that tree. And so that led to his thoughts and his theories about the expanded theories of gravity. And so Newton returned to Cambridge in 1667 with those theories in hand. And within 6 months, he was made a fellow, and 2 years later, he was made a professor at Cambridge. And so the point is that we live in a time of great opportunity as well. And so I want to share scripture with you real quick, Proverbs 24:33-34. A little sleep, a little slumber, a little folding of the hands to rest, and poverty will come on you like a thief, and scarcity like an armed man. And so the point is, although this is new times and uncertain times, and you may find yourself at home more with less to do, don't waste this time. Leverage this time. And so, Pastor Trevor, how would you encourage people to leverage this time in the days ahead?
Well, I think I'm kind of feeling, I'm thinking about what I've been doing the past few days, and I'm feeling a little bit inconsequential compared to...
You don't have prisms in your house?
I do not, nor do I have apple trees outside to observe. But I do think that, I think one of the main pressing things is people got to just decide right now, I've got to be present. I've got to unplug from the news feed. I've got to stop the cycle, because I've just found myself a couple of times. I'm just reading one story after the other, just like rapid fire. And so you have to decide, okay, I've just got to stop for a while. I'm going to turn the phone off. I'm going to be present. I got to make sure I'm present. What we've been doing at night, we've been doing nerf war. So we've been having a nerf war. Me and the boys, and Allison sometimes gets caught in the crossfire, but the boys have had a big blast with that. I mean, they ask all day, when are we going to do nerf war? When are we going to do nerf war? When are we going to do nerf war? And so we've been doing that. Like I said, I'm a little embarrassed because it's not as significant, but it's a great time for extra cuddles on the couch. And that's what we all did last night. And we watched American Idol, and just kind of hung out there. We've been praying together as a family in the morning, thinking about things to be grateful for and praying for people. I think it's a great time, while it's still appropriate and permissible, to invite some friends over and hang out, get your mind off of just everything that you've been hearing, and just experience some community with people. I think, obviously, clean out a closet you've been trying to get to, clean out the garage, replace some light bulbs. I mean, I think that, we're so high paced all the time, and there's just some things we don't pay attention to, whether it's, getting to that budget you've been wanting to set, follow up with some people you haven't talked to in a while, write some cards to some people and encourage them. Just figuring out some things to do. I don't think would be that hard if you just gave it a moment to think about it. But if nothing else, just being present with your family and some friends, I think would just be tremendous. And it would maybe give you a new pace going forward on how to do those things, or that you're going to start doing those things. I never knew the nerf war would be such a big deal to the boys. I mean, it's been really me. I've just been laughing about it, and because they just bug the life right out of me about it. But I'm like, man, this is so good. I mean, I just don't have to do this during a global pandemic.
Right.
I can do this at any time. But I do think that right now it's so easy just to get caught up in the social media part of all of this. It's like, get the update, read a couple of stories, put it aside, and, be present, watch a movie, do Sunday's Kids Creek activities with your kids, play a game, get out some cards, Monopoly, whatever, Rook. I just think it's a great time to kind of just look each other in the eye, have fun, tell each other you love each other, tuck people in at bed at night, go to bed, and start it all over again. It doesn't have to be super spiritual, but it can be super meaningful.
So you may not come out on the other side with a new version of calculus.
That's true.
But possibly more meaningful. I think that's a great point, Trevor, that just making sure you don't miss the opportunity to spend time with the folks that are in your home and your friends, and those Nerf wars probably will be much more meaningful than definitely any sort of math that you could come out with.
Well, my clip only holds 10 darts, so, I don't know what that means. Maybe on the other side there will be a real Nerf innovation for the world on the other side of all of this. And I really look forward to what it means to the Nerf industry, that I was able to crack some significant code that's been holding back Nerf wars everywhere.
Yours only holds 10 rounds. That means it came from California.
Well,
all of our gun guys will appreciate that.
Could be.
But yeah, we definitely encourage you to leverage this time, and essentially whatever you do, just don't waste the time. Use the time you've been given to learn something new. Who knows? You may come out on the other side with a new idea. You may come out on the other side with a new career.
We need each other, and being with each other, laughing with each other, it really is therapeutic.
Yeah.
And it's valuable. It's necessary. So, and the great thing is that, we have ample time to leverage our needs right now, as far as it relates to being in community and proximity with those we love and live with, and even those who are nearby that we call friends.
Yep.
And
phones still work.
Yep.
Skype still works. Google Duo, FaceTime, all that.
Yep. So
we can still connect with each other. We just need to make sure we're leveraging those things, and that may be something that our groups take advantage of, and we'll be talking a little bit more about that as we move forward. But Pastor Trevor, thank you for giving us the time today. I know it's been hectic, it's been busy, and we definitely appreciate your time and your leadership through all of this. I said that sort of flippantly, but in all sincerity. And
we look forward to really nailing down a great format on the podcast, and hopefully, people will find it helpful and useful, and at times, they may laugh at us, laugh with us, but we do want to find ways to just be present and to provide some extra voice and extra opportunity for people to be mindful of what we were talking about as a church, and maybe what that means on a deeper level in their life going forward. So I think it's going to be a great thing, and this is a good time to start it.
For sure. If you're not following Pastor Trevor, be sure to do that. You can find him at Trevor Barton. And of course, we want to make sure that you stay engaged with our church social media accounts as well. Make sure you're following. Make sure you have your notifications turned on, as we're going to be communicating with you as often as we can, and getting content out to you. We've been talking about even some new ideas this morning. So we're excited about those things. We would love and appreciate if you would go ahead and subscribe to the podcast and review the podcast, share the podcast. That would help us a lot. And thank you guys so much for listening to us today. Trevor, a minute ago you said that the format of this thing could get better. How could it get any better than this?
I know I'm really wanting to.
Are you saying we have room to improve?
Maybe not. I mean, maybe we started at the end of the spectrum.
We love you guys. Have a great week.